Taina and Katya, and I'm talking today about the origin of third stage astrology. And you know what I really wish I had? I wish I had a prop right now. I want to have a little cartoon figure like a Batman or a Superman or a Spider-Man character, because it's the origin story. And having been a comic book collector, I automatically think about things like that.
Okay, yeah, I was not a comic book collector, so this is a little bit lost on me, but I'm going with it.
The superhero always has an origin story, right?
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Right, so it's like you have the story and you know what's going on with them, you already know them, but then it's like da-da-da, it comes out and it's this big thing, the origin story. So you get the back.
So
Okay.
how did Superman become Superman? How did Spider-Man get his powers? How did I'm actually more of a Marvel than a DC person, so I don't know why I'm well, Spider-Man is a Marvel character.
Okay, yeah. So how did Third Stage Astrology get its origins? And we don't have a prop, but we have you, and you are the originator, the channel.
Not on either, at least, or a mask. I should have had that. Mask up here, not down here.
That's a little coronavirus quarantine joke.
Yes, hopefully won't have any significance to anyone in the future.
Oh goodness. Truly, hopefully. Yes. Okay.
All right.
So what are the origins? Where do we start?
Where do we start? We could start with looking at its elements from history that come into play, or we could start by looking at things from a biographical perspective, because third stage astrology really just sort of developed with me. Now I know Isabel, my student, I told her the story about being in my 20s and sitting in the back of a car with a bunch of friends and lying my head back and getting all this information being given to me about certain facets of the astrological system that I use. And from that, she assumed that the entire system got downloaded into my head one day, which is not true. There are elements of it definitely have been, but that's not the whole picture, because it really has been developed from many different levels of consciousness throughout my lifetime. And I think it's really important to develop things that way, because you test things that way, and it's a more sound system. I'm not a fan of all-seeing, all-knowing channeled systems of perceiving reality, because my sense is it's important to keep things open-ended. And one of the things that beyond having a very specific system of astrology, I am very much a proponent of free will astrology, and of not having a kind of deterministic perspective on astrology. That this is what must happen to you. This is your karma. All of that stuff. So to start with, now in my chart, I've got Moon, Mercury, Venus conjunction in Pisces, trine Neptune. I have Neptune aspect my Sun. I have tons of quincunxes. Quincunxes represent reaching into other levels of consciousness and reconciling apparent contradictory principles. So that's a very, very, very intuitive chart, basically. But I've also got Virgo rising, which analyzes things and wants to be grounded. I've got a very strong Saturn. I've got Saturn making a positive aspect to all those Pisces planets. So again, it wants to be practical and grounded. So this particular vehicle, which would be my personality for third stage astrology, designed a certain way to bring in that information. So as a child, because of all this Pisces stuff, I was super, super intuitive, which I didn't really think anything of, because one of the things that people assume is that they assume that other people are more like them than they actually are. So as a child, I was intuitive about stuff, and I thought everybody else knew it too. So when my grandfather was sort of throwing me up in the air and catching me one day, my wonderful, adorable first stage Sagittarius grandfather that everybody loved, I knew his eyes were saying goodbye. And so when he died, a day or so later, everybody was so surprised and shocked. And I thought, well, didn't everybody know that he was going to die? I knew he was going to die. It was obvious that he was going to die. And I would, then other relatives, and I had so many animals. I have a strong sixth house, and the sixth house, one of the things it rules is pets. I had tons and tons and tons of pets, so I got to get a sense of when they were going to die, even if it was just a kitten. And there was a time where it finally started to totally terrify me and upset me. And I really didn't like this fact that I kept seeing death all the time. And there was this point where I thought, well, I'm always going to know before anyone or anything I love dies. And it felt like horrible. And so I decided I was not going to be psychic anymore. I was going to be a skeptic. And I've always been very interested in, and this is part of where I love skeptics from, actually. But I was always very, very interested in anything scientific, a very scientific mind. So then I went into science nerd mode. I think I was probably by the age of 9, 10, 11, I was going in that direction instead of being so automatically intuitive. Having subliminal memories in my very early childhood connected to sacred sites in Africa that I intuitively knew all about, even though I wasn't told by my family. I could feel where they were. I wanted to go exploring them. I would have a song that I would sing at sunset in both of the houses that I lived in as I was growing up, both in South Africa and in Canada. There was a large rock, big rock you could sit on, a little bigger than a sofa, facing west, and I would go and sit on that rock just about every day that I could, and I would sing the sundown with this long, long prayer that years and years later I discovered was one of Akhenaten's prayers. He had priests that would sing at the sun at the 4 times a day, and I was the priest who would sing the sundown at sunset. So I was still doing that. I knew I was singing the ancient Egyptian, but I didn't know where it came from. I was a bit appalled when I found out it was actually Akhenaten, because he was.
Can you say the name again?
Akhenaten. He was a kind of a scary guy.
Okay. So you were appalled because of his persona.
Yeah. But I'm sure, what we were actually doing in our little priestly duties was fine. He was just a scary guy. So separate from the nice singing the sundown bit that I think was just fine. All I remembered was the good part. I didn't remember the other part until later, but that's another story. When we get into the reincarnation stuff in more detail, we'll go further into that story. At any rate, so there'd been that mystical thing, but by the time I was 9, 10, 11, it was really science. I became tremendously interested in psychology, and I started studying Carl Jung. I did teach myself to read when I was 3, and I was a reading addict. And I still am a reading addict. I've always got about 5 books on the go. At any rate, because I got so interested in psychology, I was studying all forms of psychology and really interested in Jung's work. I was very interested in psychological typing also. So I had a babysitting job at 12 years old. That's a normal thing for a 12-year-old. And I was looking after this little girl all summer while her mother was at work. And there was nothing to read except astrology books. So I thought, I didn't like astrology because I didn't like pigeonholing people. I didn't like that there's just the 12 signs, and I really didn't like the sun sign astrology columns where there's one destiny for everybody dependent on their sun sign. And it's funny how people think I'm so unique because it's my special sign and I'm going to look up what it says about my sign for today, but still being categorized into these 12 little categories. It just didn't make sense to me that that could be possible. And I had judged astrology on the basis of all of that. So I do understand when other people do that. Yeah. And what's interesting about those sun sign astrology predictions is they had a very positive origin, because they started out at the end of the 19th century when astrologers were really in a ghetto and nobody knew anything about them. And they wanted to find some way to get the general public interested, to get them to know about the existence of astrology. So they created this sort of fun little thing that didn't really have a whole lot of meaning, just in the hopes that people would then go looking for more real astrology. That was the purpose of it. But it's graded, and it now gives a poor impression of astrology. At any rate, I got sucked into that poor impression. However, I remember looking at all these astrology books, and they were just sun sign astrology books. And I thought, well, I love psychological typing. I'm pretty bored right now. So maybe I should read these. They'll read these books and maybe I can modernize this because it's really old. Maybe there's some interesting psychological information in these 12 types. And I'm sure they don't affect us on the basis of when we were born. That didn't make sense to my little nerdy logical mind. But maybe if I take them outside of that whole concept of when we're born, then there might be some use to this. So I learned all the types, and then I started categorizing everybody I knew. And then I started noticing it's like 80 to 90% are fitting the sign that they were born under. And I'm thinking, well, that's beyond statistical probabilities.
Yes.
Again, I was little Ms. Spock in those years. And I thought, well, then maybe there's something to this. I had categorized myself under the sign of Pisces. And then when I started to learn that everybody has a unique chart, when I started looking at more in-depth astrology, and I learned that my chart has Pisces as a dominant sign.
Yes.
There's got to be something to this. I have to learn this. And so that was it. Boom, I was sold. So in the meantime, the other things that were sort of operating in the background of all of this was when I was 9 years old, I started having a series of repeated nightmares. Same 3 dreams happening over and over again. Really, really scary. Did not like those dreams. While I was studying psychology, I was also studying dream analysis, and I loved it, and I love it still. Anybody who wants to dream analyze, I love doing it. So I just have that faculty for symbolism that's automatic for me. I could analyze all my dreams really effortlessly. But the 3 repeated nightmares, I could never analyze the symbolism of them. So one day, I was like 11 or 12 years old. I was sitting in my bedroom, sitting on my bed, contemplating those weird dreams I had. And all of a sudden, I thought, well, what if those are not real, regular dreams? What if those are past life memories? And maybe that really there is such a thing as reincarnation. And maybe those dreams are happening because of a past life that I had. And immediately something in me went, yes, that's exactly what it is. And then right after that, something in me went, no, I am refusing that. I want nothing to do with that. So it was pushed away again. I did have a lot of phobias. I had a real terror of anything to do with the Second World War, especially the Holocaust, Nazis. Those nightmares were all about that. My chart shows intense past life trauma in a recent lifetime. So we left that alone for quite a while. It sort of lurked in the background. The nightmares would show up on a regular basis, and I just put them aside. Then when I was, I think it was 14, because my mother was pretty amazing. She loved to encourage her kids in any interest that they had. And my father was pretty open-minded about certain things too. So my mom got me for Christmas, she got me a Ouija board. So I took one look at the Ouija board and went, I don't get a good feeling about this, and I put it away. By summertime, somehow one of my friends found out I had a Ouija board. So, we got to take this out. We got to play with this Ouija board. That's like, all right. I didn't want to do it. But we played with the Ouija board. And she kept asking questions like, am I going to meet a guy? I want to go to the mall. Am I going to meet a guy at this party? And this thing was moving around. It was answering the questions quite clearly. And so I said to her, well, I'm not moving this thing around. I don't think you are. So what's doing this? This is that curious mind again. Let's find out what this is. And so we asked questions. So are you a spirit? Yes. Did you live before? Yes. When did you live? What's your name? When did you live? When did you die? So this guy said he was lived in the 14th century, and he gave the date of birth, date of death. And then I said, well, you lived a long time ago. Why are you talking to us? That was the first thing that came to mind. He said, well, I was your brother in a previous lifetime. You were both my brothers, and I killed you both, and I owe you a debt. So any way that I can repay you, then it will help to resolve that debt. And so we started asking him tons of questions. And he gave our names and our dates of birth and dates of death, and I asked questions about our previous lifetimes and all the rest. And once again, this was this revelation: is it possible that there really is such a thing as reincarnation? We would go, we get called to dinner. My girlfriend's staying over for dinner, and we started talking about that past life. We started having the same images in our minds of what our house looked like, of where we were living. We had this kind of shared memory experience. And I have had throughout my life various experiences of having that happen. And what is one way to remember previous lifetimes is to meet with someone else, and anybody we tend to have a strong connection with. We travel together in packs. We often have been together in other lifetimes. So these kinds of things can kind of come up spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
So I started getting more information from this Ouija board guy, and going to a party and talking to a friend at the party who was taking arts history, because one of the things that I'd assumed with my 14th century lifetime, I had always loved medieval music, and I said to myself, well, I'm sure if I was back there, it was in England, I loved the lute. I must have played lute. I must have played some kind of stringed instrument or something. I just know it's a part of my being. Such a huge love of music. I've always composed music and wanted to play that instrument in this lifetime. So when I was at the party, I talked to this friend, and this friend said that, I gave the name, and my friend said, oh, we studied that guy in arts history. He was a relatively well-known poet and musician. There's still some of the music around. And because it's a time period that we study classical music, but that's more recent music. Not the older music isn't studied quite as much. So I thought, oh, wow, that blew my mind.
And you had no idea about him? You had just found out his name through the Ouija board reading?
Yeah, I just found out the name through the Ouija board. Yep. Yeah, so I mean, I've had so many experiences, and this is diverting a little bit, but it does play into how third stage astrology was discovered. Yes. I've had so many experiences in terms of reincarnation that on so many different levels, from so many different directions, it creates so much proof. There are many other ways people try to explain people's past life memories, and you have to get so convoluted to try and explain all this stuff in another way. The simpler conclusion is, yes, those are past lives, and yes, those are past life memories, and you just leave it at that. Mm-hmm. So that did open me up to really thinking, wow, there really is a past life thing there. And now my dreams and these phobias that haunt me, I have to start paying attention to this. I have to start to face this. So it still took quite a long time, but I got to the point of being able to accept that I had been through something along those lines. It was still extremely hard to talk about without shaking and my voice quivering, and it was intense for a long time. But I could start to get a sense of that, and I could start to begin to be able to start to remember more of my lives. And as I started to study astrology when I was 12, and with traditional astrology, it takes about 10 years to really know what you're doing with astrology. I found for some reason with my system, people can learn faster, 3 years before they can really know what they're doing, which is great because we're in a time when everybody wants to learn everything faster. We need that.
Yes.
So over time, I started to be able to begin to see other people's past lives, to begin to see how it lines up with the chart. And it was because my own memories were starting to open up because of those experiences that I'd had. And also, as at the same time, this scientific mind was continuing to evolve and develop. So it's the intuitive and the scientific, and the ability to start to go in and tap that inner understanding. I was looking at certain older symbols from medieval astrology that also made a lot of sense for there being, these different experiences that people have had that follow a long perspective. There was, I guess in my early 20s, one book that started opening up a lot more stuff too, which was, trying to remember who it's by, Maurice B. Cook was the pen name for Astrology and Astrology Plus, which is talking about a lot. It's a lot of that. The framework in that book inspired a lot of my understanding, clarified a lot of my understanding. And so various other forms of astrology and astrologers' insights and knowledge have helped me to clarify this picture more fully. But at the same time, it's been sort of the direct vision of people's souls and people's souls' experiences that keeps giving more knowledge, more information, including the download in the back of the car when I was in my early 20s. But that already, it's interesting how anybody in in a scientific field, because really astrology is considered to be an art and a science, whatever our current fashion is as a culture in terms of whether or not we respect it, it is a form of science, and scientists gain new knowledge and gain new understanding through a lot of concentration and study on that particular field, but also through these intuitive leaps and these intuitive breakthroughs. So that all came into play with bringing it all together as well.
Yes. So Taina, the basic principle of third stage astrology, which is that we are not our sun sign for just one lifetime. We actually travel through that sun sign for a series of 9 to 12 lifetimes, really, right? It's a long series of lifetimes. And that basic principle, was that something that came to you intuitively? Was that something that you found, any evidence of other astrologers even contemplating?
Not the specific 3 stages, no. It was certainly, the clue came from some of the old symbols, that there was more than one symbol for the sign, and it was marrying a lot of things. So it was marrying the clues of there being more than one symbol for the same sign, combined with the fact that I could see people's histories. So like a long little string of experience. Right. And it's a certain color for a while, and then suddenly changes color for a few more lifetimes, and changes color again, metaphorically. And here's these symbols, particularly the 3 symbols of Scorpio, actually, which are the ones that really survived the most. And the Goodman brought that forward in her book, Sun Signs. She talked about the 3 symbols for Scorpio, of the scorpion, the gray lizard, and the eagle. And so that, that was always a really sort of just a very fascinating imagery for me. Yes.
Can you say the author of Sun Signs? Lynn Goodman.
Lynn Goodman, Sun Signs. Yeah, and I remember, of course, reading that when I was still in my very early stages of studying astrology, because everybody starts out studying sun signs, which is something that the astrologers who brought out the concept of sun sign predictions actually brought out the concept of studying sun signs, because before that time, if someone asks you, what sign are you, you would answer your rising sign.
Your rising sign.
That was the original fundamental sign that we have in original astrology. Bringing the sun sign forward only happened relatively recently, a little over 100 years ago.
Yes, and so these symbols, these ancient symbols that are more than one for each sign, I've also heard it said from these other lineages that they represent different levels of consciousness of a certain sign, right? So a less evolved expression of Scorpio would be one thing, and a more, the scorpion, and really the highest evolved expression would be the eagle, right? So it sounds like kind of the real puzzle piece that fits in there, that it kind of seems like once you hear it, you're like, well, at least for me, like, of course, because is that we don't evolve through them in a short time. It doesn't just happen in one lifetime. Oh, I was a kid and I was, in the scorpion phase, and now I'm, 40 and I'm in the eagle phase. But that actually, for consciousness to really evolve, and everything that takes, I mean, it makes sense that it would take a long series of lifetimes, just looking at human evolution and how that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then that was the medieval perspective originally, was the different symbols represented different levels of evolution. And so that really, again, it really tripped something in my mind while I was looking at the other stuff that was going on. So input comes from many different directions. And I think that's the case when anything is being developed or evolved. Knowledge comes from lots of different directions.
And I have one more question for you, which is just, are things still coming? Do you still have things coming, like new discoveries? new additions.
Yeah, yeah, but they don't come as much. They tend to be a little bit rarer, and because everything is so unique and everybody is so unique, there are unique little new puzzle pieces that come into play. Absolutely, and I'm not always the one who discovers them either. Sometimes students discover them, which is cool.
That is cool. Well, thank you so much for telling us about the origins of this incredible system.